And we are live. Welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup. And I have the great pleasure to introduce Ken Brothers. Ken, thanks very much for joining us today. Much appreciated. You have a tremendous background. You've been in risk in cybersecurity for quite some time. Why don't we just jump into with both feet and just I'll ask you just an open-ended question. How did you get started?
Okay, sounds great, David. And I got started by being told to go be an auditor by the people hiring software programmers, and being told to go do that computer stuff by the auditors when I was first looking. And in between, I found security.
And what's your formal education like? How did you end up just getting that first role where you were sent over to the auditors department?
Yeah, well, my first role actually was doing help desk support, and I had a master's in accounting, and that's what led to all of the software development managers that were hiring talent from colleges telling me to go be an auditor, but the auditors didn't want to hire anybody with a master's degree. So I was kind of stuck, but I did find a role.
Why is that, Ken?
What's that?
Why is that? Why do you think that did they feel intimidated?
For the auditors, no, it's straight money. They could get enough undergrads and they wouldn't have to pay them for the added degree. At least fresh out of college, there were enough of the entry level. And on the software side, it was just really tough to convince people that, the heart and desire was in computer coding and wanting to become a good developer. And so it was rough, but I found a company that was looking for somebody to help support their tax product that they had at the time. And they had a couple other one-off products. Their core product was actually legal software that let you do search of the court law and cases that were out there. And this was back in the day when it was CDs, and they would ship them out and ship the updates. And, people would call in when the program wouldn't update right or the new versions weren't working. And so I helped with that, but I also helped with the tax product. And just as I mentioned, I had a master's in accounting, which doesn't really fit with a technology person, but sitting on the help desk, I would get to listen in to some of the support calls escalated to the national expert on tax who had written the book and all this and was behind the software. And when people were complaining that basically it wasn't that the program didn't function, they just didn't like the answer, we had the ability to ask him if he would like to jump on. And so I got to listen into some of these very theoretical discussions about the tax law and how it actually applied to some of these forms and situations. And it was great, sit there and get paid to, learn more.
Isn't it amazing, Ken, that a help desk support exposed you to such, so intricate and valuable information almost just through osmosis, just by being there?
Yes, and how to work with people was one of the biggest takeaways from that job. And in looking back now, it was only, I believe, 3 months where I was there. It seemed much longer just because of what I learned, both dealing with our customers and or the salesmen out with customers, because we did pre-sale support as well as post-sales, as well as, in this case, the actual, clients working with, the expert, and just how to work through difficult situations when people were very, very angry when they started the call. And the gentleman's name was Mark, and it always amazed me. Usually at the end, most people left happy to have learned from him and figured out why his way was right. Occasionally, and I think it was only once or twice, people would get mad, slam down the phone or go away, and they didn't like his answer or how he was approaching it. But after that, and I had heard about computer auditing, and so I tried following up to see whether that would be a career possibility and what I would have to do to get into the mix to be included in that. And the short is I was extended an immediate offer for an interview just because of what was happening at the time with their practice and their open headcount. And I was extended an offer 2 days before the help desk I was working for announced that they were relocating. And although we were in a very cold, northern climate, it was relocating to an even colder, far away location. And nobody from there was planning to go. And because I had the offer and I was new, I didn't feel too bad about giving, 10 days notice to say, you know what, I think I'm just going to take this job offer and begin my career. And that's how I got into the general computer auditing. And even during training, they're like, you're really technical. And once I was on a couple of engagements, they came back and said, hey, why don't you catch up with our tagger team when they come through town? We have these security experts running around the country, breaking into systems, helping people fix them after they do that. And you might be, qualified enough to sort of run with them. And when they came through, hooked up, they said, yeah, this is great. And I was off and running at that point.
It's amazing. And is it safe to say that you typically say yes, to maybe sometimes even very difficult decisions, or just the ones that are not necessarily, in your comfort zone? Is that something you seem like you've just taken ownership over roles that you knew there are going to be a little more challenging, and you kind of, step your way through by doing that, just taking the opportunity?
Yes. And as you describe it that way, and it's interesting sort of that you would pull that out just from the little bit that was there. But when I started in technology, it was for a hometown computer shop, and it was more trial by learning. And, here's a couple parts, go out to whatever the business was or the home location at times was for certain people, and fix, their problem. And so you had to get really good at being adept on your feet and figuring out what was actually going on. That was actually my introduction to computer networking. I would get out there and, they had reported something that seemed more like software wasn't working. Well, the software wasn't working because it actually, resided on a LAN server, and the network was actually down. And, the first couple of times I went, I didn't know what a network was, or, how the cabling went, and had to learn all of that by, calling back to somebody who knew a little bit more, and then just thinking on your feet. And that fed into, particularly with the tagger team experience, and when you're doing, what's now penetration testing or red teaming, you really have to think through what you're trying to do and how to get around some of those temporary roadblocks that may exist. And, finding that sort of first crack is really the challenge. Often a lot of those engagements are boring until you get that first crack point. And at that point, now you have something to start, chipping away at and seeing if you can expand it and open it up.
And it's so interesting because it's something that's not, not being taught at school, that problem solving mindset, that basically, and a lot of times you have to be comfortable to be forced into it. I think a lot of the people that are coming out of school and they're trying to get like this phenomenal job right away, and they're not willing to potentially just accept any offer, and, even if it's not within the comfort zone. And as you can see, like, you've learned so much from, like, you had a really great foundation to take ownership over additional roles as you grew into them. And I'm sure you had a much greater appreciation to some of the people that then at some point in time reported to you because you knew what it was like.
Yes. Oh, yes. And I must say too, thinking through training and the training opportunities that I had, or that my managers and coaches were encouraging me to take, was super phenomenal. And so that's the one thing I've tried to assist anybody working under me, is to make sure they get that development. And not just the development, but it went so far as the lady who was managing me for a while said, you know what, take this course. It'll help you understand network communication a lot better, but take it with this instructor. And when you're out for training, sometime during the 3 days or 5 days, I forget how long the course was, she was like, make sure you offer to take him out to dinner and, buy his meal, expense it through. And I was kind of like, we can do that, way back. And she was right. It was phenomenal. The classroom learning was one thing, but sitting with somebody and building a relationship, afterwards, was great. I would see that instructor years later at conferences, and he would be like, how are you doing? If things could have gone well, he would check in quick and remember me. And out of how many students, to have that. And so having that well-roundedness to education, not just go learn the stuff that you need to get all the technical details right, come on back and start using it to help us. But developing those relationships. And actually where I was, the relationship piece was another big component of the services that we provided. So making sure you could work with the clients.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Those soft skills, I think, are also very much in demand these days. As someone who also has a master's degree, I can tell you that, they teach you that at school, like they teach you all the basics of what you need to do. And then you're out in the real world, and there's just so much tacit knowledge that you learn on the job. And there's not a lot. I mean, you hear about this, and people do listen to some like podcasts like this one, of the importance of these soft skills and the importance of them for being able to propel yourself in your career. Because I think even having a master's degree, whether it's accounting or computer science or whatnot, it's just a foundation, right? It just shows that you are capable and have the aptitude to learn at a certain level. But beyond that, between that and being successful at your role, whatever role that is, there's a huge gap that is not necessarily being taught. So tell me about the kind of the next roles and how you became an executive with a lot of responsibilities. Because again, and I'm sure it wasn't a straight line, and I'm sure there was like some trials and tribulations along the way.
There was a bit of sort of consternation there, and in learning, and one good thing as well, I got to see a breadth of companies and how they operated across industries. And even within a given industry, I got to see how different company management would be seen in working with the technology and security people that I interacted with on most of our engagements. The kickoffs and wrap-ups were usually at a very high level and with very senior management. And on our side, everybody was brought in there as well. And eventually, as a manager, I was participating in that more. But seeing the differences across there helped me to understand that security needed to fit the company, and everybody's journey and what made sense to do next was definitely not the same. And after my consulting career, and I went independent for a while, things had slowed down after 9/11, and travel was just really restricted. And so that had some negative impacts on the amount of work we could do. In looking, and you talk about just being uncomfortable and what drives things. And so there were some personal drivers that said, let's look for something that's a little more steady and a little more sure than consulting. Although I had, I would say, more free time and family time consulting, there was also times of sort of higher stress and when I wasn't available and really had to be away. And so trying to balance that, and that led to the possibility of taking on a full-time role. And it was a little nerve-wracking because I was being hired to come in and run, all of security for a fairly large, at least financially, institution. And in kicking that off and starting that, one thing that really surprised me was the gentleman who was there had expected to retire in a couple years, but Sarbanes-Oxley was announced. And when he heard what was going to be required as part of that, and we'd already been formalizing the policies and standards that had existed, but because it was a very small, close group, everybody traveled by word of mouth, and everybody understood what needed to be done. And there were only a couple managers, so if you weren't following something, it'd be like, "Hey, can you tell?" And so the manager would go to the person and be like, "Okay, look, this is how we have to do it. This is what security wants, or this is our IT process." And the same for us. If somehow we weren't following their process and we started to install a new tool, and they were like, "Wait a minute, and, do we have a chance to look at that?" So you would just work through all of that, but formalizing the documentation was something that just wasn't a forte. And when Sarbanes-Oxley was announced, he was really sort of I'm out of here. He's like, "You have the audit background, you'll be perfect for this." But at the time, I was still hands-on, trying to install, get a few upgrades done, trying not to be extremely disruptive when we did that. And one of the greatest skills that I perceive my boss having, he had been around the company for 30 years. He knew everybody. And so before I did anything, I would run by him to say, "Here's what I'm planning to do. Who's this going to possibly step on their toes or impact?" And so we would try and look beyond just the immediate upgrade to identify, who that would affect, and make sure they at least knew on a certain day we were making the changes. And we didn't get one of those where everybody came in the next day and we forgot to put a firewall rule on or something, and an application was down and nothing was working and nobody knew why. And that relationship again, and that's going to be a key here. Ken has learned over time that having open communications and working with people, and kind of the earlier point, making sure that people are aware ahead of time, even if there could be kind of that negative consequence and feeling, and sort of doing that right thing up front instead of trying to skirt by and possibly do well, I hope nobody notices, or if there's not a problem, we don't have to worry about it. Mentioning a change could entail questions and potential delays, but those are always worthwhile, because if somebody's asking a piece I haven't thought through, then I either need to understand a little bit more to know what they're asking and why, or if I've already assessed that, then the answer is fairly quick to let them know. And so I really liked as much as I could. And occasionally, you kind of didn't realize that somebody else was sort of hanging on to the coattails of a technology and their use case was not known to you. But short of that, working through and taking that time to try and get it as right as you can up front has been very good and successful as well.
It sounds like the people management, if you wish, is also very critical for success in terms of the whole cybersecurity management and posture of our organization.
Yeah, if you would call managing your peers as people management, although a gentleman that we helped, and he was speaking a lot about incident response, but one of his other sessions, and the title confused me, and so obviously I went to hear what he had to say. He was talking about managing your new boss. Mm-hmm. And so he had been in a incident response role and capability, and so they got a new security person above him. And, not knowing what somebody may know or not know about what you're doing, and not to be presumptuous, having those conversations to find out where they are and make sure you meet them. And we're back again to that sort of interaction, communication, or people relating. But it was really good to sort of hear him. And I'd never thought about how you manage your boss and managing expectations. It was actually a little bit more than that, on how much do you train them, how much information do you give them, and then how much of sort of where they fall short are you picking that up and just dealing with it and giving them enough information that they need to guide you.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've talked to a lot of executives when I ask, what's the first thing they do in the first 60, 90, 120 days. Is a lot of it has to do with going out to the different business units and talking to the stakeholders and creating that personal relationship and figure out what it is that they care about, so they can ease into the role and figure out how to deploy technology wisely, how manage expectation, as you mentioned, and so on. And I also like to double click on something you mentioned. which is super interesting. The fact that you were a consultant and essentially running your own business for a while, that's also a very good experience. Like, I highly recommend, because it's like, first of all, you now have an idea of what the other side looks like if you're dealing with consultants, which I'm sure you do that on a regular basis as well. And then just not knowing where your next paycheck will come, and figure out that there's a direct correlation between what it is that you do and the revenue. Because I think a lot of people have a disconnect in terms of like, okay, you come over, you do your job, and somehow, miraculously your paychecks, shows up in your bank account every 2 weeks. But somebody out there has to generate that revenue. And if that revenue is not being generated, you, eventually the company is going to crumble. So I think that experience is also very valuable.
It's very valuable, and that was one of the pieces on, how much time do you spend on your business development when you have, I just say, the mountain of work in front of you. If it doesn't stay there, at some point you have to be watching, when is this going to start expiring, and how long is the sales lead cycle to get the next engagement, and trying to keep those rolling. Even as a paid consultant, as a manager, that was a big part of my role, was ensuring that we had the work pipeline and the jobs ready. And sometimes customers were flexible, and so in the actual execution, you could choose when to do them, and other times it was more rigid. And so, there's a lot of details and balance that goes into running and being entrepreneurial. That is a lot different than working for a company. And I'm getting a lot of pressure to re-enter that world. And at this point, I'm still resisting. I think I would rather be part of a established, consistent team. Anyway, yes, being able to leave certain places behind was always great, but I don't want to enter one of those places. And, having to leave the really good environments was also kind of tough, because you never knew your next engagement, which type of environment you'd be walking into.
It's all about trade-offs, right, Ken? It's, and then I think what you just mentioned is, as well, is the kind of, life is about, a set of dials, where it's all about you balancing out. So sort of like, if you wish, it's almost like a steroid dial, like about 1,000 of these, where you constantly, dial, up and down, depending, and for, various different areas of your life. And I think that including obviously the career path as well. So let's jump into kind of the cybersecurity area. So you've seen you started in audit, which is now compliance, which, now risk management and so on. And things have really progressed. And, cybersecurity has become a front and center for a lot of executives. There's also the ability to translate the risk speak to executive. All those things have really changed in the past several years. If you can pinpoint, what your experience was like during that kind of like the transition, from kind of rudimentary basic compliance requirements to increasing regulatory environment, to increasing risk, to increasing exposure, to increasing endpoint. I mean, there's just everything exponentially exploded like in the past 10 years. What can you, like, as an executive, what's the insight you can provide on that process?
Just keep swimming.
Pretty much sums it up.
We were using the term, and we consider ourselves thought leaders with PricewaterhouseCoopers, but we were using the term risk management for security, and people were scratching their heads and not getting it. And some people thought it was a decision between products and which one you would go with, but seeing security as a broader risk function. And we even had one gentleman who was talking about foreign nations being a threat. And I got to say, most of the team, right over all of our heads, we were like, what's he talking about? Isn't it funny? In both of those instances, it took, I think, longer than perhaps we expected. But eventually those changes and that thought process did come around. And now, it's sort of, this guy's a visionary.
Yeah,
he saw it coming 15 years.
But that's truism. I find that there's several thought leaders in this space. like in any other spaces. And then what happened is, some of them say things and some of them are, it makes sense. Some of them maybe like people look at it and say, oh, what are they talking about? And then it comes out to be true. And some of it, it's not true. I mean, so it depends. Some visions are not really, and it may take so longer, who knows. But it's funny because it takes a little while for the collective mindset to catch up.
Yes. And, I had something I wanted to comment on there when you were talking, and I got to listening, and now I lost it. So,
no, it happens to me all the time.
Just and it's tied in with the continuous learning, and as things adjust and as the environment changes, just to be able to do that. Oh, I know what it was now. With the learning it still amazes me how much I don't know. And being in a current search for my next position, I'm back to how many companies are out there that sort of, I don't even know they exist until I start looking around and digging into it. And I can remember as a consultant, that was a very early learning curve that took me a while to step up on to understand sort of the breakdown in the markets and just how many companies could exist out there. And in some way, there was no way you could ever know and be interactive with all of them. But that sort of continuous learning and what you don't know, and where you talked about some of the visionaries, sometimes people talk and I'm not sure what they're talking about in the security space. And it's either that they're in that way ahead spot, or it's just that they're in a vertical, perhaps government, where they're just speaking in an environment that just, if you haven't had exposure to, you just don't understand, what they're talking about. And they might be really focused in on, one pronouncement or document, or, how you would, in audit speak, implement one specific control within an organization, or in that case, an agency. And so it's tough to follow. But, when I encounter those, I'm always trying to figure out, where's my shortcoming? Where are they coming from? And even sometimes CISOs that have more developed programs, and, some of the control processes that they talk about that are almost a no-brainer to them. And my challenge had been, how do I apply that to a small team of a handful of people, or 2 or 3 handfuls of people, versus some teams that were hundreds plus of people.
So something that definitely keeps you humble. It seems like when you start figuring out like how much there is to learn. And I think that a lot of folks are, especially executives, they rely on others to basically provide guidance. And there's so much you can learn. There's so many areas within, so many domains and subdomains within cybersecurity that it's impossible for any one person. And I can tell you, I've learned from every conversation I've had, and this is my way of, by doing these interviews, to learn, hands-on with people with different expertise. But it's remarkable. It's really remarkable in terms of like how much is there to learn. And it's a moving target, so you can never really, catch up to it.
Mm-hmm. Right? Yes. And if you talked about being humble, I was going to say the other thing is, if you can have those conversations with peers in the industry and put the ego away, and instead of always, oh, I've done that, or, here's what we were doing, just listen to, where people are. And it could be that they're almost ahead of you, and you're just not realizing it. And you're almost trying to tell them, hey, you really need an antivirus that's going to look at signatures. And in today's world, people are going to look at you and shake your head and be like, no, that's like so yesterday.
In your search, did you come across any exciting technologies that you weren't necessarily aware of or had preview to that made you like think, okay, we're moving in the right directions or not? Or what's your kind of experience been like?
And it's not so much just because of the search, and I think maybe I've remembered the term. I was having trouble remembering it the other day. I think amorphic encryption might be the term. And to me, that technology coming out and through context, I had commented or just liked a post, and somebody in that space said, "Hey, would you like to talk and learn more?" And so I said, sure, I'd love to hear more about this. And as I was pursuing some opportunities, subsequent to that, I saw on one of the security news sites, the tagline, and I believe it was MongoDB, had the searchable encryption. And so in a way, I was like, I know what they're talking about, and I know a little bit. I still don't quite understand and grasp, how it happens that you can search something that's encrypted and be able to find the actual underlying data without finding it. And even the ability to manipulate the encrypted data and still have it encrypted as a result. And eventually, somebody who has the keys could actually pull the actual details out of there and sort of validate it. But to me, that change in encryption, I know there's a lot of focus, right now on elliptical curve encryption and, that being the quantum computing. But this one to me seems to have a lot of very practical applications. And I would say throughout my career, I've always tried to look at, with security, what's the practical application and sometimes implication, because it could be a negative. But practically, if we can have a security technology control that works very well and seamlessly, except for the risk that users forget that we need security behind that, it's really good. And if that's the risk you're down to, at least to me, I believe as a security professional, you're operating in a very good space to have that user experience that is secured by default. And so, I saw too, there was a post DevSecOps recently, and, do we need it in there? And once it's baked in and it becomes part of everyday business practice and operation, then, we can drop it. And it's good when it's baked in there. I think sometimes we still have to add the security tag to what we normally would just talk about to make sure that others realize we've thought about it and put it in there. And I don't know if that's part of the recent, craze where security has become elevated and talked through, or if it's perhaps there was a lot of too much talking about security happening and not enough actual action, and people doing good security as much as talking to others about how great good security is and, why it's important, and, even saying that they're doing it without having some validation to the board or senior management that it was happening in their company.
And I think cryptography is a really important area. The entire internet is based on exchange of keys, of shared secrets and so on. And let me ask you this: I always ask that question, to folks that I talk to. If we look, especially now, we look at social media and, LinkedIn, and everything is perfect, right? So people are have this amazing titles with amazing, roles, and, and they travel and they do all those amazing things. But a lot of it, the work that's, especially cybersecurity, is pretty mundane, with maybe some exciting areas in between, and sometimes there's adversity as well, whether things that happen or things that are not exactly go as planned. And I think that you learn a lot from these experiences, more so than you learn from when everything's just happy and great. Can you share, without divulging too much information, and maybe some experiences that you learned quite a bit from, and then maybe what was the outcome? And I know, actually, and by the way, this whole conversation is completely unscripted, so there's no right and wrong answer, and you're doing great. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, some of the challenging situations are when you don't realize the environment and some of the implications of what you're operating in or where you're doing. So that entrepreneurial spirit can be great. And hypothetically, although, okay, we'll know this isn't, stepping into a company leadership role coming from the consulting world, where in the consulting world, you're somewhat used to tossing ideas around and some banter back and forth and on controls or on best practices. What are they really? Is it being effective? Isn't it? You know, changing the administrator name on computers for a while was a big thing to do, but you could bypass that so easily that why are we even recommending this? And sort of having some of those discussions was the world I was used to. And on the sort of first day of officially being in charge of everything, I was handed this, I believe it was sort of we need a response to this. And I looked at it, I'm like, where's this coming from? This is almost out of left field. It doesn't really fit. And so, the only thing I had was an email contact for the person. And so I sent off and said, where are you getting this from? It's not published anywhere. The standards that existed at the time, wasn't in there. The general concept was around. And I got myself into a lot of trouble because I was effectively arguing with a person that I should not have been arguing with. And so anybody in a heavily regulated environment will probably, understand that without saying.
Relate.
So
yeah, I relate
by
to
the
that.
time the, regulatory angst over my insubordination rose up and came across to our management and came back down to me, people were not very happy. And so that was a difficult conversation to have. And then resolving that was also a little bit of a challenge because at that point, my management had decided sort of we have to do exactly as was requested. We cannot question or push back on this at all, or it's going to look like, we're just resisting way too much.
Did you get labeled as a troublemaker, Ken?
In a lot of ways, yes. And I actually went further and I said, that may be, but we have to do what's sort of right by the business here. And I'd rather see if there's a way that we can make this work and fit for us better. And at the end of the day, with some help from technology admins, we were able to craft what was required and needed, but also in a way that in working with the various business units, they felt that we were being reasonable as we put this in place because they knew it was coming. When the regulators say you're doing something, you have to do it. But they felt that we gave them as much consideration as we could. And so that actually, had a lot of benefit for some years to come when people realize, hey, it's good to go to security. And I learned too, there's the times for having the discussions and then there's the sort of time for implementing and doing that.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. And a lot of people also don't necessarily advance in the sense that they maybe become, individual contributors and they stay like that. So it means that they don't necessarily have people reporting to them and, they do quite well for themselves. But you start taking ownership of more and more responsibilities. Did you ever, get up in the morning and there's something, you look at your mobile device and you think to yourself, what did I sign up for? Is this really what I wanted?
Possibly. It was usually at the end of the days, though, when it was a request from a manager saying, stick around, I need to meet with you before you go tonight. And sort of knowing that, I'm not going to leave until late into the evening or, early night. And bless you ahead of time. Just knowing, those were the ones where when I saw those, I was like, okay, let's work through this and, try and find a way so that this doesn't come up in the future.
Interesting. And And right now, you mentioned that you have a particular interest in specific roles that you feel that you may be, more suitable and potentially have a tremendous experience applied. Yeah, what in your mind would that be the ideal role for you or the ideal organization that you'd like to join?
So continuing on as a CISO is very appealing. I had been looking at, because of my financial background, transferring to a straight, solid risk position, and leveraging and applying, my security knowledge within that world. But I believe I'm still technical enough and have enough tingle underneath, and it gets me excited.
You don't think, Ken, maybe that your technical background maybe hinders? Maybe the employees prefer somebody who's pure, executive managerial, and they don't see the value in someone being technical?
So far, at least on a lot of the CISO roles and some of the supporting roles, I found the opposite. I was telling somebody the one time, I was like, this job search is crazy. I got 2 emails within an hour of each other, and one said, "You're way too technical for us. We want somebody else." Another one that said, "You're not technical enough." And I would say that a few of the opportunities have actually leaned more towards not being technical enough. And a lot of, and now we're going to cross into, the mix of what is a CISO. But a lot of companies are still looking for almost that programmer individual who can also do security.
But it's so interesting though, because again, whatever knowledge you have, unless it's something very domain specific, and things are moving so fast, so whatever you learned like 6 to 12 months ago may be, outdated and irrelevant. So why not hire somebody who has the aptitude and has, can quickly, acquire that gap, whatever the knowledge gap and the hands-on experience, and then just, we're off to the races. Why do you think that there's just such a specific requirement for something, that is a little bit obscure?
Yeah, I think on those, it's partly company size, and sometimes it is domain, specific. If your crown jewels are code repositories, then you are going to want someone a little more intricate.
So they want to see with a GitHub account?
A lot of times, I think so. It seems that way. Or
it's almost an oxymoron.
Although I have the background for that, and one thing you noted is, maybe what I learned 6 months ago is now irrelevant and no longer there. But if you learn the precepts and the principles and those foundations and building blocks that you have, if it starts to crumble, take the good bricks out of the wall and build another wall. And so that continuous rolling does have some value, and being able to articulate that though and apply that and help others to see what they're asking for is a bit of a challenge. But the ideal role for me is that position where I'm helping take the business and financial requirements and understanding that we have to make money as a company to keep paying everybody every week, and being the interface and sort of flexible grommet between that and the people who love security. And if they're an individual contributor and they are turned on every day by coming in, searching through to look for any indications of something anomalous or particularly malicious happening, keeping them happy, keeping them motivated, helping them to learn and develop it and tweak their skills within that realm, all within budget, reporting on that, on how well we're doing. That's the type of thing I still want to continue and be doing.
And if you kept with the tradition of being out of your comfort zone, what would you consider doing? If it wasn't that, because I mean, and this is something you can think about. Maybe we can, again,
yeah, we may have to follow up on that one, because in some ways I'm not sure, how to answer, be out of my comfort zone. And
well, I think also it's more difficult now since you've already, you've reached a very, high status, the pinnacle of the kind of the security profession. So maybe, I don't know what the next step is, maybe a CIO role.
Possibly, and I'll get myself in trouble. I have always viewed security as knowing the technology that we're using to such a depth that I know how it could break and how to secure it. And so it's, instead of being a subset of technology, it's actually the superset, and knowing that and standing it on its head that way is different. So doing some of the strategy pieces that, a CIO role would entail, I think some of those would put me outside of my comfort zone and would be there. And I think similarly, a chief risk officer role and having to formally go and be responsible for the financial modeling and interest rates or income or whatever for the specific company the risks are to their business. Can you build a model for geopolitical risk? And taking on that realm. So I think either one of those two possibilities and being outside of my comfort zone, but the next step up would be very rewarding for me, but finding a company who, and I guess it's back to that, if they're looking for the right things, they would look and possibly say, yes, this would be a guy that would fit here, versus who's already been here, who's done this before, who do we bring in that, is exactly what we're looking for and possibly give us a little bit of a breath of fresh air, which to me seems to be almost all of the job market search right now is very much on a, have you been there? Have you done that?
Which is complete.
And I think that's why entry level people are frustrated as well. Is it exists not only at that level, but it continues all the way up through.
And Kenneth, it's contrary to what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to hire for the job that they want, not the job they had.
Yes,
that's basically it. And what about joining there's a lot of startups in this, cybersecurity space that are currently hiring for, CISO roles specifically for, people that have been doing that at other companies as well. And I know it might be a little more risky from, especially this kind of environment is not as stable, but that might be an opportunity as well.
Yes. And again, startups, from my background, and having been on my own, the entrepreneurial spirit, the ability to, jump in, do anything that's needed, while you're in that build phase, is something I would be comfortable with, finding and having the conversations with a company that's also looking for that same skill set and not necessarily, as odd as this will sound, we already want somebody who's been a CISO at a startup with experience in blockchain. And, if you don't have those, we're not even considering you. So it's almost like that you're swapping, the players.
Maybe a startup that is working to provide, product or services to the financial industry, since you come from that background, has the insight to be on the other side of the desk. A virtual desk, if you speak, so to speak.
Yes, and perhaps one thing in closing is the financial services experience to me is a application of the broad experience that I brought from my consulting background. And I have those same underlying building blocks for healthcare, for manufacturing, for the energy sector. Did a lot of work with the ISOs and some of the oil companies. And so cross-industry to me is also a capability and a possibility. And in a lot of ways, to me, would not be very much outside of my comfort zone. There's always some learning curve with a new company, but.
Fantastic. And Kenneth, what's the easiest way for people to reach out to you?
find me on LinkedIn. You do the LinkedIn in/Ken Brothers, just squish it all together, keep it nice and informal. Kenneth is fine, but I go by Ken to those who know me.
Fantastic, Ken. Thank you very much, and much appreciated. Thanks for joining us today. For all those who join us, thanks for attending this session, and looking forward to seeing you in the next one. And until then, stay safe offline as well as online. Take care and be well.
Great. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.